Okay, so in today's video, we have John Burhounds. Did I pronounce it well?
You
Your
did.
last name? Okay. That help Amazon sellers and customers that import goods with all the necessary requirements in order to comply with the product and custom requirements. In this video, we'll learn what are the best practices and things that you didn't know you need to have in your packaging or other requirements that we have. Welcome, John. Thank you very much for doing this with me and being on the channel. I know that you're very busy. Could you tell us more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Appreciate this. It's always a great opportunity to talk directly with some of my clients and Amazon sellers because there is a lot out there that many people are not aware of, and you could really get into some trouble with the US government. So my name is John Burhans. I run Burhans Consulting, or also doing business as Burhans Global Logistics. And so I'm a licensed customs broker. I've been involved in the business of logistics and trade compliance for over 12 years now. I worked at a biomedical firm. I've worked at Sotheby's auction house dealing with jewelry, watches, high value pieces of artwork, those kinds of things. And then my last real corporate job was 4 years as the director of North American market for a retail marketing company that did your basic kinds of things: pots, pans, glasswares, toys, textiles. I mean, a whole range and plethora of items.
Yes.
And so since then, for the last 2+ years now, I decided to branch off and start my own firm, specifically because I saw that a lot of people are moving to this e-commerce marketplace, and they do not have a great experience with compliance requirements. They don't have the funds or the need or ability really to go out and bring that kind of knowledge base in-house. And so I provide a service to basically review products, advise on as simple things like HS codes for duty rates, or larger things like, if you're dealing with pesticides or air filters for EPA requirements, or just general requirements under US Customs, or the big one that will actually get you in trouble, which a lot of people don't realize, is the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission. They have a number of regulations, as simple things like your company name and address on a package. And
Yes.
if they catch you with that, they're the ones who actually end up finding you.
Yes, yes. I mean, I used your services, and after doing this the thing and getting the amazing report you sent me, I realized that so many people don't even like know about those things. And when you have that knowledge, it can help you also not getting into categories or products that might give you so much work afterwards. And but you mentioning like air filters and some other categories, maybe it's not a good idea to source them as a beginner. Maybe when you're more advanced and you have more funds and you have more money, yes, you can comply and have like all the requirements. But with you not really knowing all of these things, it could put you in trouble at the later stage, once you have an item that already sell and you realize that you need all these things. I did it after having my broker gonna sell our brand, and she mentioned that one big part of it is to really have product compliance for all your products, making sure that you meet all the requirements of the FTC and the customs. And I always had this in my mind, but even without selling your company, there are big risks of not complying with them, and I want you, maybe you share a little about those risks from your experience. What could happen if you're not complying, and what are the consequences of this?
Well, I mean, going back to the scenario of the air filters, because this is top on my mind right now. I've got another client who actually has an air filtration unit, which is, your standard. It's got a fan, it's got ionizing metal blades in it, and it makes claims to remove allergens, dust, mold, even bacteria claims, right? And that is an EPA regulated device. They call it a pesticidal device. And so the EPA actually saw this coming in. US Customs will alert all these
What
government
is
agencies.
EPA for those that
Oh, I'm sorry.
don't know?
The EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay.
So they regulate everything from pesticide chemicals, Clean Water Act, and the dumping regulations here in the US, as well as these devices that make claims of affecting your environment, right? So you can
Yes.
think of anything that's going to affect your environment, the EPA probably has some sort of hand in it. And so right now, these air filter units, for instance, are blocked from even entering the US.
Wow.
Uh, and they're just because they're missing a registration number. And I don't want you to, or I don't want anybody watching this to think that they should be scared off of compliance or thinking that they're not ready to tackle a product category, because
Mm.
realistically, a lot of these compliance requirements are relatively simple, and the manufacturers, the original manufacturers, are ultimately usually responsible for much of this compliance when it comes to the actual regulations that control the import of goods. So, for instance, going back to this air filter unit is actually, it's produced by a huge global company. This importer actually buys it under license, and so it's a trademark good. And as I said, it's a global company that makes this thing. So they really should have all of this compliance framework in place. You would think so anyway, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the problem is that this importer, this e-commerce seller that's moving these air filter units, didn't go or didn't understand the requirements prior to import. So they didn't go back to this global entity and say, hey, do you have X, Y, and Z, and can you provide them ahead of time? And that's why they got into a jam, right? But when you think of like higher compliance products, like EPA regulated products, or FDA, the Food Drug Administration products, like cosmetics, food, medical devices, and touching quickly on medical devices, that can be anything from your standard bandages to syringes and defibrillators. So they cover a broad range. But when you talk about items that are in those kind of categories, surprisingly enough, most manufacturers have a lot of this regulatory framework and requirements done. It's just a matter of the importer making sure and following up and understanding what they need from them to import so that they don't get into this kind of jam.
Yeah.
Um, Simple kind of labeling processes like country of origin or company name and address, those are things that are really, yes, it is the importer's responsibility to make sure that they're on the packaging. But those are the things that really typically get caught in the market once they're already here. And as I said, the FTC or the Federal Trade Commission earlier, they're the ones who actually tend to be the enforcement arm that a lot of people get notices of violations or fines, which can range anywhere from a couple thousand to hundreds of thousands of dollars, surprisingly enough.
Wow.
It all kind of depends on how much non-compliant product you've saturated into the market and what they can prove. So for instance, if you're an Amazon seller and you've sold 100,000 units with non-compliant packaging or non-compliant testing, they can actually charge you infractions on a per sale range. So
Even
they'll
for
say,
your past sales?
even for your past sales. So they can
Wow.
even go back and up to 5 years back and say, you've sold this product for 5 years and you've sold 1 million units, and we're going to charge you an infraction for each single one.
Oh my God.
So,
Wow.
and that can be done by the FTC, the EPA. The FDA regulates it a little bit differently. They tend to give you a warning letter first, and they say, hey, we're going to give you 15 days to make corrections. And then if you don't, then they'll start putting more, not necessarily fines and penalties, but restrictions on your importation process and your sales. And eventually the FDA will just give you what's called the red flag notice and say, you cannot import anything.
Yeah.
And then US Customs goes ahead and just says, nope, you're not bringing it into the country.
Wow.
But so yeah, there is a high potential risk, certainly for some of these regulated categories of products.
Yes, yes. Wow. Um, First of all, I always had this in my mind that okay, if I sold some, units without being like no one catch me, I'm fine. But what you said now, it's really concerning. And it actually make it more important. Like you have to comply, you have to do all these things. Like people making it seems easy, like to start an Amazon business, and it is easy, like it relatively you don't need to invest a lot, but people are not aware of those things, and that's, I think, very important that you're here, like sharing and explaining all this information. And you're right, like yes, sometimes you will deal with factories that comply with certificates and all the approvals and lab tests that they need to do for their products. Like I'm selling on my other brand, which is like a toys brand. I didn't, you didn't work on it, but it's a brand toy. And one day Amazon just woke up and tell me, look, you have to provide us the CPC, if I'm not wrong, and then a lab test for each product. So I contacted the factories and they, because I made customizations and changes, they of course didn't have the lab test. So I have to do it from, from the beginning. And some of them didn't really reply. So I have two products that I have no lab certificates that are stuck. I have inventory in Amazon. I have inventory at the warehouse. And these factories, they kind of disappear. They don't want to help me with that. Yes, I'm going to do it with like independently without them, but it's really annoying. And if I knew all these things before, I could do things differently. Now, one of the checklists or the process that we do is if they are comply, if they have all these things, and maybe you can share, like you mentioned, countries of origin. This is something that I know most of the sellers are having, because the freight forwarders will actually check it for them and see if they don't have the country of origin, it's too risky for them to ship because it could hold the entire container for them.
Mhm.
So they're like they're checking this thing. Um, Another thing I can share from my experience, that I had like a silica gel packet in one of my products, and they make like really big troubles getting it out of China. Apparently, we had a workaround of shipping it from a different port, which worked, but then the next shipments I didn't put the silica gel. But like, do you have like more examples of things, like little things that could really make big troubles, like this silica gel, or country of origin, or distributed by, like, what is the fine for like if you don't have the distributed by, like, and then your company name, the address and all of that, like, is that serious, or you can get away from it, or?
Well, I wouldn't say you can get away from it. I would absolutely recommend that you have it because under the FTC's Fair Marketing and Packaging Labeling Act, you have to have either a manufactured by, distributed by, or imported by name and address. One of those three parties of interest, right? Now, the FTC, whether or not they're going to assess you $1,000 intro fine or they're going to charge you, $100,000, it's really going to depend on what kind of risk they see with you, what your saturation in the market is. Obviously, you do have some recourse with, claiming as a small business and asking for some sort of provisional relief, but hopefully you don't want to get to that point, right? The only idea is that you don't want to get to the point where you have to ask or petition for relief from a fine. You want to be able to avoid that ahead of time.
Yes.
So I would absolutely recommend that you always have just those two at least basic requirement information pieces. The country of origin, that's required by not only US Customs, but also FTC. And then the manufactured by, distributed by, imported by, one of those entity name and addresses. Um, Going back to like little things that can really cause some major headaches that a lot of people don't understand are things like lithium ion battery cells, right? For instance, when they are incorporated in an electronic item, they're actually regulated as a hazardous material or a hazmat good for shipping. And a lot of people, yes, there's lots of things that go without notice, without proper labeling and so forth. But all it takes is that one time for that freight forwarder to recognize that this has lithium ion batteries in it, and then require, it needs a certification for testing to transport because it's considered a hazmat good. It needs special handling and only certain carriers can take it. This is probably what came with your silica gel, where it's a hazmat good and maybe the authorized carrier only operates out of the other port. And so that's why they had to move it through there. But again, those are little things that could either, at the worst case, they hold up the shipment, right? They hold up the shipment, they cost you a whole lot of money and it's just time invested and so forth. That's really the worst case when it comes to the shipping.
Yes.
For smaller hazmat goods. The best case is, yeah, it goes through without a hitch, but then do you really want to take that chance continuously? Because you never know when, it's like the sword of Damocles hanging over your head. It could fall at any moment and hit you with penalties, fines, just, headaches, cost, and nobody wants that, right? Everybody wants logistics to move quickly in and out.
Yes, yes. That's true. For toys, I know personally a lot of sellers doing toys, and you have a lot of liability with
Mhm.
toys. Like what are the requirements for toys that you can share with us that are the main ones that are super
So
important?
yeah, I mean, toys really, they have, a big range, right? I mean, toys are what the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, what they consider toys really is a broader category that you can think of as children's products, right?
Super.
So essentially anything that's sold or intended for use by children under the age of 12 is subject to testing and regulatory. And that means like clothing items. That means, even furniture pieces, foldable tables, child carriers. Toys are the ones that are, yes, generally thought of as they absolutely need testing. But everything, if you've got a hoodie, for instance, I had one client who had a hoodie with
Yes.
a drawstring in it to basically cinch up the hood around the head. And that was non-compliant because the drawstring extended longer than 3 inches. And
Oh,
so, and they had already produced, 20,000 units of these without understanding the requirement. So, you really have to understand that it's a children's product, and anything under 12 is going to have some sort of regulatory compliance testing and mandate to it. Now, obviously that varies between clothing and, child carriers, your high chairs, your stools, and then your general toys for entertainment. But broadly speaking, most toys, most children's products need to be tested for lead and heavy metals. They need to be tested for phthalates when they contain plastics. They need to be tested for small parts. And then there's also going to be more than likely, there's going to be some other additional specific testing for whatever that product category is. Like if it's a textile for flammability, or if it's a folding chair for mechanical hazards and pinching and that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a broad range, but
mm,
basic heavy metals, lead, right, phthalates, small parts testing. That's going to be your basic starting tests.
yes. That's important. Now, I have a question because when I had this issue I mentioned before with the lab test that Amazon required me to provide, they sent it to like a local labs in China, and like how the Amazon can actually trust that these labs are giving like real results. Is that like, I mean, I know they accepted it, but when an issue occurs, do I am obligated to check that the lab that I got the report from is like a known lab, or that is actually like approved to do this?
Yeah, so they're the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, they go and they accredit laboratories, meaning they actually get the lab's SOPs, they certify that they're okay to test certain standards, right?
Yes.
So you can use any lab worldwide. I will say with a caveat there that Amazon specifically, at least last year, they did have this unreasonable requirement that everybody use US based labs. And even though the CPSC doesn't require you to use a US based lab, it does require you to use an accredited lab, but not a US one. There was a lot of fights I got in with Amazon on behalf of clients where, I had to write them letters and explain, look, the CPSC doesn't need this to be a US lab. You don't need it to be a US lab, et cetera, et cetera. My advice to a lot of clients now is that if you're going to use an overseas lab, talk to them first or see if they have a US presence, meaning that they've got, like, for instance, SGS or Intertech, which are big laboratories. They're global, they have global offices around the world. They have offices in China for laboratory testing, and they have offices here in the US. Those seem to provide some sort of relationship or a shared server or cloud server where they have their standard testing stored for all
Mhm.
of their items. And Amazon seems to have some sort of connection with them or ability to view the US based labs servers. More than likely, they're probably held on Amazon servers since Amazon is the largest, server provider. So they probably are just able to go into their own servers and take a look at it. But
Yeah.
without any proof of that, I won't go into that. But the thing is that if you're going to use an overseas lab, I would recommend that you, number one, check that it's CPSC certified, And number two, see if it's got a US affiliated lab or subsidy here that may share information, because that's really seems to be the best of both worlds.
Yeah, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Um, okay. Now, I feel that, we covered the important things, but if you need to give like a beginner, someone just started on Amazon and tips on what he should really make sure that they have, like we mentioned the country for region that distributed by, is there any other points that he really needs to check before he, initiate like the first shipments to Amazon?
I mean, the thing is, compliance is such a huge category, right? I mean, if there's a product on the market, chances are somewhere there's a regulation that's gonna, ask some sort of conformity to it, right? So, realistically, I would think of as a base kind of checklist. I would say yes, you've got your standard label and packaging, right? So your country of origin, your statements of identity. So usually, this is going to say what it is on the packaging. You're going to have your manufacturer, distributed by, imported by. Other things that are kind of out there and outliers that you really should take a look at or make sure that you check are things that are not necessarily federal regulations, but are more mandated by the states. Things like suffocation warnings for any kind of plastic bags that you may have, or Prop 65, which is specific for California, which goes beyond the standard elemental and chemical testing and has a whole list of, I think it's up to 1,000 chemicals where California regulates them, right? And if your product contains any one of those, it has to carry a Proposition 65 warning. And so those are kind of outliers that aren't known a lot. So definitely check for those things. But also, do your research on it ahead of time. Before you commit to a product, I think the best thing to do is do your research ahead of time. Check for potential compliance requirements like toys, textiles, stuffed furniture articles have other specific regulations, electronics in terms of safety and liability, and really do that kind of homework well in advance before you decide to ship. I think that's going to be your best business practice, because nobody wants to get it all the way, even pass through customs and then get it stuck in Amazon, because Amazon really has taken up this kind of mantle of compliance. And they've said, because they're a retailer, because they're so liable for a lot of the compliance requirements, as much as they try to stay out of it,
Yeah.
they're the ones marketing, selling this stuff. And so they're really kind of enmeshed with the compliance of these products. And so they've taken up the responsibility, just as a private company, to reduce their own liability, to make sure that all of their sellers are compliant. So even if you get it through customs, you sell it through, you've got it there in Amazon, Amazon may be the first one to stop you and say, hey, this is non-compliant. You need to do X, Y, and Z. And at which point, now you've got to pay extra money for getting it out of Amazon, relabeled, repackaged, tested. That's the nightmare that everybody should want to avoid, right? You want to
Yes.
you want to spend all that money, which is cheaper upfront, to do the research, and then go ahead and get it in there without any hiccups and sleep comfortably at night, right?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe a couple of years ago, you could get away from it. Like the pressure on Amazon wasn't that big like it's now, and because of that pressure on Amazon, I'm sure that the customs also raised their standards, kind of, and checking more things. And while you talked, I got an idea, and it's something that I do on another area. When I create packages and for new products, I brainstorm with the big brands. So those giant brands, they're obviously, like, most likely comply with all these requirements. They're so big that they had to pay and do all this work. So a quick hack is just ordering their product and see how they are designing their packaging, what they're putting on their listing, and all of that. Of course, if you have more than one or two items, it's I think it's a must to use someone like you, John, to really like check and make sure that you meet all the requirements. And that's what I did, and I got an amazing report. And after getting this report and talking to you, I asked you, like, you must be on the channel and share this with more people so they understand this, because it's a very important topic. So thank you very much for doing this. And for those want to contact you and use your services, how they can hear about you and contact you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a presence on a lot of different sites, but my site is burhanslogistics.com. You can go there, send us an email through client services, and we can certainly get you back a quote to review your product, just talk about HS codes. Or if you wanted to set up a consult call like this and talk about different regulatory issues and so forth, get some background knowledge. I always like to leave my clients with some sort of knowledge base. My goal is to try to train up my clients so that they can take the responsibility themselves and hopefully not need somebody like me, right? Every time they got a new product, they know what they need to look out for. They know the pitfalls, because that's really the benefit that I try to bring to anybody I work with, right? If I'm the one that you're constantly coming to, I mean, I appreciate it, don't get me wrong, but my goal is always to try to educate people, right? Because everybody's got to kind of take this in-house, because ultimately, if you're an importer, if you're a seller, you're the responsible party, right? You can't push it off to anybody else. Even if you tell customs, oh, well, John Burhans told me I can do this, this, and this, they're going to say, well, we don't care, So I really want them to be, educated and understand what agencies are going to affect them, what compliance requirements they're going to be subject to, and then just the general knowledge about how to import, because then you can speak to other brokers, other freight forwarders, and negotiate problems that may come up without having to, go back to Google or go back to me or go back to anybody else and
Yes,
work.
that's very nice of you, and it's obvious that you like to provide value, and you're amazing, so thank you again. I'll put links down to your website and your contact info, so people interested, they definitely can contact you easily. And thank you again. I hope maybe in the future you'll be a guest again in this channel. Thank you. Agree.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to come back, and then we can really delve into a specific topic, and you'll see the wonderful world of compliance, right? Sometimes people's eyes cross when they see all of the things.
Yes, for sure. Thank you again, John. Have a good one.
Thank you, too. Take care, Tyler.